Ah, feels good to be back in front of the camera again. Hello all, I am Cheeto Snake, and we're gonna be doing a little something a little different today. Actually, I know normally I would delve into gaming or comic book or other nerdy news and stuff like that, and with the Nintendo Switch out, I was thinking about announced rather. I was thinking about doing a video of that, but everybody else already did that. So I was just like, well, I'll just leave that alone then. And then, well, let me just start off by saying, as you all know, um, if you all know who I am, you know, whether or not you've been looking at my videos or you know me personally, you know that I am a metalhead. Metal is my favorite music genre of all time. I eat, sleep, and breathe metal practically, and every day I gotta listen to at least 5 metal songs before, and I'm good. I'm good to go for the rest of the day. But I have to say that I love metal. Let me just I just don't like it. I love the genre because it's so versatile. It's not restricted. I especially love the melodic genres like melodic death metal, like it. Power metal, love it. Symphonic metal, love it just as much as power metal. Neoclassical metal, most definitely. So yes, I love metal, and I was watching Jared Dines' most recent video called, Things You Should Never Say to a Metalhead. And I find myself, after watching the video, in several comment threads about like different genres of metal. Like, it's basically one giant discussion about what classifies as metal. Basically, the way I see it, it all started with the whole screamo definition of screamo coming into play. And, of course, screamo is not all screaming music. In fact, screamo really isn't a real genre of music, all right? So for all of you that think that, get that out of your heads right now. It's not a real genre of music. Basically, screamo is just it's a weird term that kind of incorrectly describes any music with screaming. But it's mainly used to describe emo hardcore with with any elements of scream or like death screaming and stuff like that. Well, not death screaming, just screaming in general. If there were death growls, then it would be death metal. But anyway, I digress. So basically, from there I started drifting off into a bigger question, and that led me to the biggest debate amongst rock and metal fans of the century. What the hell is the difference between hard rock and heavy metal? And people still don't know to this day. Now, a lot of people like to classify hard rock as basically anything that doesn't quite stand up, is not quite up to snuff with the standards of what metal would generally be considered today. So, like, for example, out of all of your Korns and Slipknots and all that, if anybody would look at them and then to look at, like, say, Black Sabbath, they would instantly categorize Black Sabbath as hard rock. Basically, anything that's harder than rock but softer than metal. It's in that weird in-between place, sort of. And it's kind of weird to define what that in-between is. So I'm going to do my best to define, to me, personally, what I think the difference between hard rock and heavy metal is. And hopefully, hopefully this helps any of you that are interested in either of these genres to sort of tell the difference. So here we go. Alright, so first I'm going to start off with hard rock. Now, as we all know, the history of rock and metal started off with blues, then it came over to rockabilly and rock and roll and all that, And that's how we ended up with more modern rock. And from rock, we started shifting into something heavier because somebody decided to have the bright idea, hey, let's go ahead, have like sort of weird screams added to some of these lyrics, and let's make a heavier, more grungier sound. And thus we have metal. And from there, somebody decided, hey, let's play faster. And that hence we got speed metal, which in turn gives birth to power and thrash metal, and then everything just keeps coming down. So with the birth of hard rock is basically like, if this was like a music genealogy, hard rock would be like the Goody Two Shoes brother, the Goody Two Shoes sibling of heavy metal, with rock being their father and blues being the grandfather. Basically, hard rock is a bit more simplified as far as, musically it's more simplified. Easy, it tends to have easier riffs than in metal. A lot of clean vocals. You never really hear any distorted or harsh vocals in rock ever, really. It's just a lot of clean vocals, a lot of sometimes sometimes it's just, well, most of the times it's actually simple drum beats. Sometimes they like to change it up though. It's just the way that hard rock is structured, it's not as musically complex as metal. So if we were to compare, like for example, Dragonforce versus Wolfmother, the differences there are obvious because Dragonforce is the heavier band, the faster band, and they include a lot of complex harmonics and arpeggios and tremolos in their music, especially with their solos. And Wolfmother is more or less straight to the point. Here's the drum beat, and it's typically just simple for time signatures. Pretty easy chord progressions, clean vocals all throughout, and there you have hard rock. But it's of course has a little heavier undertone than rock. Now with heavy metal, if you look over on that corner, you have the like I already said, it's heavier. Meaning that guitars and bass typically sound lower than in rock and hard rock. You sometimes get a bit of distorted chord, like dissonant chords in your music, depending on what genre of metal you're listening to. And there are a lot of, like I said earlier, there are a lot of complexities with it. So many complexities actually that there are some genres of metal like neoclassical and prog metal that do way more than just 4/4. Some I've heard even some songs in 3/4, 6/8 time signatures, and they could constantly shift time signatures and even key signatures at any point in time of the song. So that's metal, and also metal tends to have clean or harsh vocals. The ones with typically clean vocals are the traditional heavy metal like Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, and then power metal bands like Power Quest, Dragonforce, Glory Hammer, Hammerfall, and all neoclassical metal, all that stuff. Harsh vocals typically go to like death metal, black metal, sometimes thrash metal, and doom metal, those kinds of metal genres. Now, it's kind of hard to distinguish rock and metal to the untrained ear, especially when we're not quite too familiar with metal. The way I can put it, the simplest, is that hard rock tends to have more of a pop-like sound to it. It's not necessarily pop music, but it's easier on the ears to the listener as opposed to, I would suppose, metal would be. So that's one way I can put it simply. And not only that, but there are this metal is so vast and expansive now, in comparison to rock, that metal has now become even completely different from itself in a very good way too. Of course, with rock we have pop rock, blues rock, we have progressive rock, we have hard rock, and you know, in terms of and in terms of emo rock and all that, in terms of basic, the basically just five of those subgenres with that fall under rock. Oh, and alternative. Okay, but here we have way more with metal. We have heavy metal, thrash metal, speed metal, doom metal, black metal, melodic death metal, neoclassical, symphonic, gothic. It's all over the place. Metalcore. So there's definitely more to metal than I think there is to rock, because with metal does not restrict itself too much, and that's one of the reasons why I like that genre so much. And one thing that I will say about this though is it there let me just there's some people that think that heavier music from the norm equals metal, and that's not it. Like, for example, please do not call AC/DC metal. They are not metal. Please. I've had people call them metal before and say that they're a metal band, and no, they're not. They're rock. Okay, they're hard rock, but rock. Um, I've heard one White Snake song that was pretty much borderline, but it was still hard rock. In my opinion, there was a cover of it, a metal cover of it that kind of made it more obvious. But other than that, pretty White Snake is pretty much hard rock. Um, so yeah, basically, a lot of, and also the thing with hard rock and heavy metal is a lot of times it's subjective to time also, because as rock and metal start progressing, mainly metal, as metal starts progressing over the years, it gets heavier, it gets faster, it gets a lot more intense, and of course, since it gets more intense, then the older bands that would have been considered metal back in the day are now considered hard rock. Like, I know that's definitely happening right now with bands like Judas Priest, and even some people nowadays consider Iron Maiden hard rock and not heavy metal, which doesn't make sense to me, but to some that's how they view it. And so I can understand why, because I mean, honestly, I can see 20 years later a band like Power Quest being considered hard rock somewhere down the line, uh, because of how much metal would probably evolve from that point. And so yeah, so that's just, I mean, because music is constantly evolving, there is of course going to be no real way to define the difference between hard rock and heavy metal, especially when heavy metal continues to be, I would say, demoted to hard rock. But overall, the underlying differences is complexity of musical structure, typically lyrical content, vocal styles and ranges, and there you have it. Those are the main differences that I can think of, in my opinion, between hard rock and heavy metal. And if you guys want any suggestions as to what bands to listen to for comparison, or just for enjoyment with either rock or metal, mainly hard rock or metal, because I don't like the softer rock type stuff nowadays. I can't. But if you guys need any suggestions as to hard rock bands or metal bands, let me know, because I would be more than happy to show you guys the difference, to have you guys listen to the different types. And I would love to get somebody else into power metal, because honestly, that's just a great genre and it's so underrated, and I feel like more people need to listen to it. It's amazing. So do you agree with what I said? Let me know in the comments. Also, you can go ahead and like my video if you if you like what I said here, subscribe for more stuff. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what your opinions of the differences between hard rock and heavy metal are. And so, thanks for listening to what I had to say. Now that I've said my piece, peace.